Get your ears wrapped around the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast. All the scoop you need to know from college basketball to the NBA and even March Madness. News of your rising stars. Topics on and off the hardwood. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast.
To the GSMC Basketball Podcast right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Brice Lewis. We have another great show for you today. Just talking about more basketball. Like I said, just a great time to talk about all types of things, any type of thoughts, any type of ideas that you think about in basketball. We talk about all right here on the podcast, and I think that's very exciting and very, very fun to see and be interactive and be around and all of that. I think that's something that you definitely want to do and something you want to get into. Today's show, obviously, we're going to talk about more stuff, obviously. Like I said, there's some news coming out of the league, whatever news we can get. Obviously, the Jordan documentary is still going on. I'll give my thoughts at the end of the show about it. And obviously, other things that people talk about in basketball circles, and one thing I really want to do on this podcast is just give the ability to feel like we're having a real conversation. That, I hear my part, then if wherever you're listening this to, however you're listening, you can give your opinion in your mind and be like, okay, I get that, I see that, I don't agree with that. Because listen, it's all a big conversation. We all love this sport that we call basketball, and it's just about it being a big conversation. It doesn't have to be anything, serious. It doesn't have to be something that can cause fights. It's just something that, everybody has an opinion. Everybody views things differently. You know what I'm saying? Not everybody views Michael Jordan as a GOAT, even though the majority of people view him as the GOAT. It really just depends on the person. It really does. It just depends on how you view it, how you look at it, and et cetera, moving forward. So for me, like I said, we're going to talk about basketball stuff today. Obviously, I like to start off these shows by giving you some basketball news. And, when we go from there, we're going to really get into some real conversation and just, talk about everything that happens around the NBA and the association. So, to start off, the NBA has now allowed some teams to start opening up their facilities May 1st for teams in the cities who's lifted their stay-at-home shelter acts. And so what they've said is this does not mean the NBA season is imminent, but it does provide more optimism. And it gives players a chance, and maybe coaches a chance, to get the team together. Because again, we don't know what's necessarily how the season is going to come back. If we're going to even have a regular season, are we going straight to the playoffs? So every team is going to be still coming together like they're playing. And, it does obviously make some things interesting. Obviously here in Georgia, we lifted our stay at home clause, and obviously, so I wouldn't be surprised if the Atlanta Hawks might do it. Now, obviously, NBA teams don't have to, but they're allowing. It's just players have access to the facilities. Obviously, these facilities are state-of-the-art facilities for most cities. So a lot of players, they've been staying at home a lot. So sometimes they may just want to be at the facility, not even just to play basketball, but just to be out of their house for a few hours. They may just be sitting around chilling because, some of these facilities, they just have game rooms and stuff like that, have some downtime. Obviously, if they're still doing the 10 people at a time, obviously you don't want to bring too many people in there, but I'm sure they're not going to have the entire, how busy that building could be. Everybody's going to be there. I'm sure the coach and organization is going to decide, okay, who we want here, who can come here. Are we just going to keep it strictly to players? Are we going to allow, maybe you can request a coach to come with you, different things like that. It's just a lot of different things so it'll be interesting to see what happens when it comes to all the teams coming together. I definitely think it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Just to see if what happens is something that we can really dig into as an organization and as a fan. So, I think it's encouraging, obviously, if you're an NBA fan. But obviously, you don't want to get your hopes too high. You don't want, because obviously we're still in a time where everybody's still trying to be careful with Corona out there, and you don't want to do anything egregious. So I'm sure the players are going to be careful. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of communication about who's there, who's coming in, who's coming out. Just making sure that they're controlling the in volume of people. And I'm sure they're going to have you in teams that are going to sit here and be like, okay, well, we're going to set our own rules. Like, okay, maybe we can have like 10 to 12 players here at once, or personnel, whoever, and just go from there. So I think that's something that, brings some encouraging signs for NBA fans who, are looking forward to bringing the season back, and for us playing basketball again, a sport that people miss and love so dearly. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things I think that we are looking at right now. We're trying to see what happens in regards to the NBA basketball season. It's just something we really got to see and see how it works out. And we're going to go from there. And we're going to hope for the best. Like I said, we're going to hope for the best, and we're going to do what we can. We're going to do what we can. So, we'll see how this progressively maybe leads to the potential opening of NBA cities and all the access to everybody, and then potentially creating a scenario where then the season can maybe start to have more clarity on when they could potentially try to get it back and going again. Probably again with no fans for the most part, but just back and going again and trying to really do what they got to do. Because obviously that's probably the most important thing, is safety of the fans, safety of the players. Because I'm sure if another NBA player got coronavirus, I'm sure they would shut everything back down. So they're working on a very tight schedule, a very tight situation here, because you don't want to cause anything to reflare or come back up again once it has happened once, or with a couple of players in your game. In other news, the Washington Wizards, obviously this is some draft news, have sent scouts overseas where Lemelo Ball is playing, as they have been reported to show interest in Lemelo Ball. So that's probably somebody that if they get a top 3 pick, they will look into getting. That will be interesting to see, because obviously right now the point guard is John Wall. I see Lemelo Ball translating to the league as a 1 that can play the 2, but obviously if they're going to draft him, that means either Bradley Beal or the John Wall are out of there, and I'm thinking John Wall. Obviously people say John Wall has probably one of the worst contracts in the game, so you have to see who may be willing to take that deal off of him, also coming back from the Achilles tear. But it'll be interesting to see, Lemelo Ball in the nation's capital, if that were to happen. Obviously, he's a part of the Big Baller brand. Obviously, he has his own NBL team now, and he's doing what he has to do to kind of start marketing himself and creating a brand for himself. It sounds like the path going into the league was a little bit more difficult, a little bit more shaky, because obviously he didn't even finish high school. He left high school, started playing overseas, started playing in his dad's league, but still was able to, show the skill, show the growth, and people now look at him as a top NBA prospect going into this year's draft, and look at him as a probable top 3 pick. So, I think that would be an interesting fit in Washington, D.C., if he played for the Washington Wizards, because I'm sure he'll bring some excitement they haven't had in a while. Maybe you can start over in the backcourt with him. And like I said, probably John Wall, I would feel like is the odd man out in that situation. You never know. Maybe Washington does a full-blown rebuild, and they trade Bradley Beal too. They have some assets to trade. They have a young team. They have young players. So it's definitely not something that you can take out of the realm of possibility, in my opinion. It's something that is definitely on the table if I am the Washington Wizards. And it definitely just creates a scenario where you're going to have to see how it ends up at the end of the day. So I think that's just going to be the most important thing moving forward. Obviously Washington's still trying to, see what their team looks like when John Wall gets back. But if they do go ahead and make this draft pick, if they're able to accumulate a pick that high, that will definitely cause some waves within DC. But I'm sure they're also going ahead and doing their due diligence, because there's no guarantee they're going to get that pick. And so they don't want to sit here and just put all their thumbs in needles. Because like I said, the NBA is the one draft where you may want a player, but you may not know if you have a chance to get that player. Where the NBA, anywhere in the NFL, you know if you have a certain record and you know who may be available around that point, you know you have a chance to get a certain player. So that's usually how that usually goes when it comes to just, basketball in general and moving forward and moving on. So coming up next, we're going to get to our discussions here on this podcast. We're going to get into why do so many players in the NBA today get overpaid for their production. Obviously, there are multiple reasons for this, and I'm about to talk about that coming up next, right here on the podcast.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment we discussed the NBA reopening facilities for players and teams to use May 1st in cities that have lifted their stay-at-home shelter act. So obviously any cities that have done that, NBA players will now have the access to the facilities. It'll be interesting, like I said, to see how they organize that. I'm sure it's not just like, okay, free for all, anybody come to the facility. I'm sure it's alright, so they've allowed us to do this. This is how we're going to do it. We're going to do it this way. I also talked about the Wizards looking into Lemelo Ball as they have interest in the potential Ball family member being a part and maybe being the new face of their franchise and maybe potentially even opening the door for John Wall to be traded or cut by the Washington Wizards or Bradley Beal, even though I believe it's going to be John Wall. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that turns out if Washington was able to get a top 3 pick, because everybody's assuming Lemelo Ball will go in the top 3, and then seeing if they actually go ahead and maybe make the selection for a Lemelo Ball if they have the opportunity to actually make a deal like that. But now in this segment, we're going to talk about something that a lot of people like to talk about nowadays. Why are so many NBA players overpaid? Obviously, there are multiple reasons for that. Let's get to the obvious reason. The obvious reason And it's not any fault of anybody's. It's just, the NBA is just at an all-time popularity high right now, is revenue. There's so much revenue, and then players get so much of the pie. In the NBA, I believe players have more than 50%. So you have so much money now in the league, and then these TV deals keep getting bigger and bigger. So if you think about all that, it creates the ability for players to now get bigger and bigger contracts. And so now when that happens, that creates more money to be spent. And remember, a roster is only 15 people. So there's a lot of money that can go around to 15 different guys. So it definitely creates bigger and monster contracts. But the problem is, this is not sometimes, the issue is I think first is of the max contracts, because people feel like you have guys like Tobias Harris getting a max, but he's not as good as a Kawhi or Paul George. Like, you always want to have that system where you can identify the superstar players and then the star players and this. Where the NBA, if you are just a good player, an all-star player in general, that can get you a max contract. Obviously, a lot of people feel like then at the point, you're paying Giannis and then you're paying Chris Middleton the same max deal, thinking they're not the same player, but you're giving them the same money. You just feel like from a value perspective, that's weird. And so obviously it puts more pressure on them, because that's why, it puts you in a situation where you give a max contract to maybe a quote unquote B plus kind of player, then he never reaches A plus max contract standards, and then you're over here trying to ship him off sometime. And it's very interesting to me, and so on and so forth. Like I said, it's not their fault. It's just that's how it is. You can't help it. There's more money in the game, and it makes you really have to. It's hard to have a contract for them and have a contract for that. The best thing they've tried to do is potentially with superstar players. If you make an all NBA team, you are now eligible for a super max contract, which is even more money than the regular max contract you could get. And I think that's another, and they've tried to do it that way where, like, okay, well, Chris Middleton might get a max, but he's not getting the super max. Almost like there's levels to it. But, remember, it all it depends on is if you make an all NBA team. So you can make all NBA team 3, and that not everybody on the all NBA team 3 is what we may consider superstars. So you even have a potential player who makes the team who's not. So obviously that creates and opens up a scenario where players can get overpaid. I also think it's about this. It's about value. NBA is a business. In business, in normal negotiations, if you have multiple people vying for something, the money of how much it costs will go up. Everybody knows the value of something. But then, if something is $500 in value, but 10 people want it, it honestly then comes down to how bad do you want them? How bad do you want them? If you really, 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 really want it, you'll pay more for it. It happens all the time in business. The key for you is, okay, if I pay more for you, do I still get a good enough investment back? It's about things like that. That's what I think creates a good company, mindset. So I think that's going to be the big thing, I think, with that. And, think about it. Like, best thing you can do, basically, in the NBA for a player who may be really good, maybe not be a superstar, but he's really good, is offer him a max. Is if you offer him anything less than the max, now with today's NBA, they're going to feel like that's disrespectful. And secondly, you have other teams offering the max. So why would he go to you if other teams are giving him more money? I know some NBA teams think that, hey, listen, you can win here. And so since you can win here, maybe that can create the ability for you to make something here. And so maybe you're willing to give us a little bit of a discount because of that. But most players nowadays are about getting their money and maximizing their profits during the time they're in the game. So usually that never happens. So usually you have to go out of your way, give them the max contract, because that's all you can do. You know? People are out here saying you're paying shooters $90 million. Think about it. That's not even the max, and people feel like that's $90 million just to shoot threes, average 13, 14 points a game, but just because you can shoot 43% from three, that gets you that much? Now, obviously, that's not the only thing. Maybe you play some defense, you're a good leader, but people are really looking at the NBA. That's why I think you see NFL players looking at NBA players making money, because remember, also, NBA contracts are fully guaranteed. And they're just like, you're telling me I'm a top 5 player at my position. He's a top 20 player at his position, but yet he's making more money than me. And it's fully guaranteed. So you just kind of sit there and you're kind of like surprised and you're shocked by it. So I think that's why it's just a very interesting situation to me. You know, and I think that's one of the reasons why people get overpaid. It's just, listen, there's so much money. And then NBA also has a rule in the CBA where I think teams have to spend up to 80% of the cap. And they put that rule in there so teams don't tank. Because think about it. If you tank, I could just sign a bunch of minimum wage players, the veteran minimum or whatever, small contracts, and have over $100 million in cap space. And then just be like, okay, I have over $100 million in cap space next year. I could just go ahead and start signing up guys I want to help, to keep competitive balance. Plus, they don't want tanking in the league. They think it hurts the league when a team is tanking. So now if you're telling a bad team who wants to tank, they have to spend 80%, they're going to sign some guys to money that they probably don't deserve, but they just need the money to be spent because they have to have it spent based off NBA rules. That's also a big thing. That's also something that's there. So it definitely, like I said, it creates an interesting situation and an interesting opportunity. It does in that situation, because it makes you then have to overplay players like that. Like I said, there's just so much money in the game. What can you really do? Like, really? So I think that's why you see so much money in the game given out to players that you may not think deserve it. And you're going to continue to see it as long as the money's in the game like this. So if you really have a problem with it, you're going to continue to have a problem with it, and that's all I can tell you. It's just something that's not going to go away. It's something you just got to deal with and you move on with life with, and you go from there and you hope for the best. That's really the best I can tell it to you, really. So there you go. But coming up next on the GSMC Basketball Podcast, how the current NBA affects kids growing up who want to play basketball as well. And also we'll talk about how it did in the past as well. Right here and more on the podcast.
I want to talk to you guys about this amazing product I've been using lately called Hydrant. If you're like me and you want to kick the coffee habit, but you're worried about your energy levels depleting, to avoid the morning sluggishness and that midday slump, you need to make sure you're hydrated. It's super important. And that's where I've been using Hydrant. And for 25% off your first order, you can go to drinkhydrant.com and enter promo code GSMC at checkout. Hydrant is basically flavored electrolyte packets you mix directly into your water to make hydrating your body easy and delicious. And what I love about Hydrant, it's backed by research. The formula was developed by Oxford scientists to provide perfectly balanced, efficient hydration. Again, that's drinkhydrant.com and enter promo code GSMC for 25% off your first order. Another really cool thing about Hydrant, there's no synthetic colors or artificial sweeteners. The formula is vegan and you can choose between 3 different flavors or a variety pack. So for all my vegan friendly fellows out there, this one's for you. Again, this is drinkhydrant.com and enter promo code GSMC.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we discussed why NBA players get overpaid. I listed and talked about 3 reasons I believe why that happens. Because like I said, it's something that with the league at an all-time popularity high, and as much money that the players can make because of the CBAs, and as much money as the league gets, there's just so much money to go around. And like I said, there's only 15 players on the team in the NBA. So that's a lot of money to go around. Like, you're having teams with $120 million in cap space on a 15-man team. Now think about on the NFL where you have that same number, like 125, 126, but have to give it to 53. It definitely creates a difference in money being given out in half. But yeah, and so we can't judge it. We can't hate on it. It's what the NBA is, and it's just due to, these players like LeBron creating an atmosphere where it makes the NBA loved and so global and so popular now within the United States and around the world. But now we're going to talk about how the NBA has changed from a developing standpoint as a child to getting to the league in today's NBA compared to how it was before. Now, obviously, in today's NBA, the league has changed. It is primarily positionless basketball, and everybody can shoot a 3. And it's actually very valuable for you to be able to shoot a 3, to be able to get a decent and a well-paid position in the NBA. So, obviously, you have to think about what that does to the kid. Now, back in the day, if you were going to be like a super tall kid and a big kid, 7'2", 6'11", obviously, since the NBA was more pounded, grinded out basketball, it was very important to be able to have a post game. It was very important to have the post defense. It was very important to be elite at rebounding. Rebounding is still important, but you know what I mean. But the thing is, the rebounds are different now because you're not getting long rebounds. There's a lot of short rebounds because a lot of 2-point shots were being taken. And it was more important to really, truly be a dominant big man. Where now, it's not necessarily as important to have post moves and as important to be, 280 pounds and 7 foot, because it actually can create limitations for you unless you have a skill that makes you better. Honestly, if you are a big man that's a traditional big man, the best thing that you can do is have a mid-range, because at least you can still stretch the floor in some capacity. And obviously a lot of kids growing up now, if they get to that height and ability, they have to be able to develop some type of range. Cause if you don't, if you're just a guy who could get alley hoops and dunks, you can make it in the league. You see DeAndre Jordan making it, Andre Drummond making it, a lot of putbacks, you can do it, but it definitely will limit your value potentially, because now teams are like, well, yeah, he's good at it, but in today's NBA, how reliable is he? Can he be a big part of why we win? He could be a big part of how we get to the end of a game, but he's not the reason why we can win a game, but he could be a big part of it. It just really depends if you do it well. And so, obviously that's going to make kids, even if you're like 6'5" in the 6th grade, make you still feel like you have to take the 3 ball because of that. Because you got to practice, or at least attempt to have some type of range, attempt to have form, attempt to have a shot. Usually, most big men never are really good free throw shooters, or they're very average from the line. I don't know if it's just because you don't have to think about it. Big men, you're never really taught, because free throw shooting is you have to have a form. There's a form of free throw shooting that you have to be an efficient free throw shooter. Think about it. If you're growing up as a traditional big man, you're never really practicing a shot, so to say. You're more practicing your moves. So when it comes to doing something that involves you not being directly under the basket, I could see why that's a struggle. But now kids that are older, now growing up, even though I feel like in college basketball, I feel like free throw shooting should be better, kids at least have to practice it, like I said, because, listen, you can't be out here shooting threes but then shooting 49% from the line. Because then it gets you in trouble, because now players are going to be smart and know, oh, I shoot 49% from the line, probably don't need to get in the paint and just keep a three ball or mid-range going, and then, they become a liability when it comes to the free throw shooting. So, for me, I feel like that affects that. And then from a guard perspective, it seems like, you could do a lot of things right. Usually, back in the NBA, you had I used to say you have very definitive positions. You have your passing point guards. You have your shooting point guards. You have your scoring point guards. You have different types. Now in the NBA, you have a lot more scoring guards or guards who can play combo. And then there are not a lot of us guys who are still great assisters, or you still have guys who can get high assist rates, but the way they assist is more, since they're so good at scoring and breaking down the defense, they can now pass it out to guys, because now everybody can shoot threes and then still get assists. But they're not like a true distributor in terms of what they were back in the day, where they would run offenses and just find the right guys in the right positions always at the same time, whether it's cutting to the rim, layups, jump shots, mid-range threes. And so now if you're a kid growing up as a guard, it's going to be very important to have that ability to score, and very important to, again, shoot the three. You don't want to be a point guard or a guard who can't shoot, because teams will play you off in the NBA now. And as a kid growing up, it's going to be important for you to develop some type of a shot. And then you can worry about, getting to the rim later, because that's the most important thing. If you make them defend that jump shot, you can then practice getting to the rim, because if you have the quickness and the athleticism, you can get past guys like that and then boom, finish at the rim. So it's just a matter of finding the right formula for you and the type of player you are. Some players are not gifted offensively, but they're skilled. So maybe they use their skill to operate. Like Luka Doncic, for example. He's not the most athletic guy in the world, but he is probably one of the most skilled players in the Euro. And we've talked about, obviously, in the Euro League, he played against grown men at an early age. Remember, in the Euro Leagues, they teach even big men fundamentals, how to shoot, how to do all of that. We're growing up with the AU system. It's more of a showcase. You really don't get coached, except if it's by your own parents. Maybe you hire your own personal coach or your coach in high school. So outside of that, you may not be developing. And like they say, a lot of kids growing up, they're just super athletic. A lot of kids nowadays are very athletic. And so they use their athleticism to get them through a lot, and then with the occasional jump shot. Because anybody can. Here's the thing about people saying you can't shoot. People can shoot. It's just in a basketball intense environment, they can't shoot. But like if you're just saying just regular pickup ball or just, them in the gym, then yeah. I mean, 'cause you think people can't, you think Andre Roberson really out here bricking like he would do in a real NBA game if he just had an open gym? I mean, he's not shooting it like Steph Curry accurate, but he's not bricking like 89 out of 100. He's probably making at least 30 of them, 40 of them. Where in the NBA, he's probably going to make like 15 or 20 of them. It's just a part of it. And as a kid, you have to develop that game. It's going to be very important as a kid, develop the three-point shot. Depending on your position, three-point shot. If you're one of the more athletic kids, speed, obviously finishing in the paint. But that's why you also see a lot of guards like John Wall don't really have the three-point shot, because they were always more athletic. They could always get past you. And so he had to develop that mid-range, then he had to develop that three. That's why you have a lot of players. Like I said, LeBron came to the league, did not have a jump shot because he was just better than everybody. Josh Smith didn't have a jump shot. He was just better than everybody. You still have that today. A lot of players are still having to develop the jump shot. Because like I said, if you're a kid, I can get past anybody and I can get to the rim at will. You ain't thinking of making a jump shot, especially if you have the athleticism to dunk, because you want to posterize everybody. But, some players are like, okay, if I don't have the ability to do that, I need to make sure I can set myself up to be able to shoot high accurate shots and be able to make them where I am trustworthy, where it's like, oh, if he gets open, you know what's going to happen. You know he's in a great position. You know what he can do, and, go from there. So it's going to be important, whoever you are raising your child who wants to play basketball, for any kid, just to make sure they, depending on whatever happens, because I know especially when you're younger, you might just play every position. When you start getting a definitive position, working on the skills that you see the NBA players playing in that position today, because you want to be able to not have those issues coming out of college or high school or overseas, and be able to execute to the highest level when you need it to be done. So that's going to be probably one of the most important things, I think, for anybody who is trying to get to the NBA one day. But coming up next, we're going to talk about, what do you need to win a championship? What makes a championship team? I got this because of obviously watching the Last Dance with the Chicago Bulls, but you can find out all that right here more on the podcast.
You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco, ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. Obviously, last segment we talked about how the NBA has changed and how it affects kids growing up. How it affects, the way it makes kids train. It makes kids, have a certain type of game getting younger. Obviously, kids that are taller may try to have more of a shot because obviously it's very important to be able to shoot at any position in this league. So every kid tries to have a good 3-point shot, where back in the day, you didn't necessarily have to be able to shoot the three. You just had to be able to run an offense if you were a point guard, or be able to get to the rim if you were a 2 or a 3, and maybe make the mid-range. So it kind of has changed, and it affects obviously how, like, if you're a parent or you're a coach who wants to develop a kid and you see, okay, this is what they're doing in the NBA, I have to get him ready for that. Because obviously if they ever went back to a more slower pace, 2-man in the paint game, then obviously you got to train them then in that situation to be more postmen and be able to score from closer in than, what they do now, where it's very important for you to be able to shoot the outside shot. But now, in this segment, we're going to talk about, what makes a championship team, what makes a championship run, basically. Because, I broke down what makes a great organization and et cetera, but I've never been able to really break down what makes a true team, like what makes a run to the championship. So first thing is this. If we're talking about in today's NBA, you usually have to have at least 2 stars. Or you have a very top end star and have a very good roster around him. Like, for example, the Toronto Raptors. Kawhi was the top end star. Siakam was close to a star, but wasn't completely a star. So you kind of can still sit here and say he's had a really high end roster around him, but not particularly a star, even though everybody knew Siakam was the second best player. Because obviously you gotta have the star power to match other teams' star power. Also, I think people wonder how important is coaching in today's NBA, because people like to look at, like I said, LeBron James, how he's able to win regardless of the coach. He wins regardless. Coaching is very important because it really depends on how your team is constructed. If you think about the Toronto Raptors, again, you had one high-end star and a very good roster around him. Well, that's going to take a lot of great coaching decisions and coaching to make it work. Because if you had a coach that couldn't coach, they may have not put all the other stars or the other players on Toronto in the best position to be successful. It's about really the coach, I think, is good for players who need to be put in position to be successful. Stars are guys who could just, listen, I don't even have to have a head coach, I can drop 40. But every other player who's a good player, but not maybe an elite player, they can do something, but they're kind of players who need guidance. They need guidance when playing. So you give them the guidance. And if the guidance is smart and it puts players in great position, then it puts you at a great spot then. Think about this. Think about, obviously, talking about Michael Jordan in The Last Dance. Phil Jackson came into the team and said, we're changing the offense. The offense was previously 101 isolation Michael Jordan ball. Where, yeah, Jordan putting up great numbers, but it's not necessarily winning you games. It's not necessarily winning you championships. When he came there, they put the triangle offense in, which now puts every player in position to potentially be able to do something. And it actually led them to winning championships because the offense changed. Like I said, Jordan still had big numbers in that offense, but it was to help everybody else. And that's what rose them to the next level. That's why I think coaching is still extremely important. So having a very good, unless you just have so much elite talent, like Golden State was one of the teams, you could put the worst coach and the head coach on there and they could still win the finals. If you just have more talent than everybody else, then coaching can be lackadaisical. But if you're like a team that talent is even with other teams, coaching is very important because the team that has the better coach usually can sometimes out scheme and out coach the other coach and put their players in position to be successful. Think about Greg Popovich for all those years in San Antonio. That's the reason why San Antonio was always so good every year, because they always had they usually had the best coach every game. So if you were a coach who was incompetent or had flaws, Greg Popovich would attack your flaws, and that would be where we could do it. That's why when Mike D'Antoni goes against Greg Popovich, he always loses, even if he has more talent, because he's not the better coach. Greg Popovich coaches and puts his players in the best position to be successful. Mike D'Antoni just runs the system and goes with it. There's not adjustments made. So it kind of creates this, not necessarily uncertainty, but it definitely puts a situation in where it makes a difference in championship runs. I think also in championship runs, you have to have some luck. You need a guy who could go to maybe a team that could be an obstacle. Maybe they have an injury. Maybe you get a call that goes your way. It's part of life. Luck. You just need luck sometimes. It's not like you could go against the 3 best teams in your conference, fully healthy, 7-game series, and nothing goes your way and you win. Like, sometimes you need that luck to get there. Because at the end of the day, if you're a champion, you're a champion. Nobody can take that away from you. Obviously, everybody wants to play everybody at their best so they can definitively say we were the better team, but you sometimes need some luck. Remember, again, Toronto, Clay went down. KD went down. That helped them get the advantage to beat Golden State, because everybody believed if Golden State was fully healthy, Toronto would have won. So obviously, if you think about that, you need some luck. Sometimes you can't always do it straight up by yourself. And all of that, I think, is what contributes to making a deep championship run. Obviously, growth to me. Championship teams usually play a certain way over during the season, which usually can get them between 1 and 4 sometimes in terms of seeding. Usually, like, okay, well, we could it's like they call it coasting through the season. Or they could play at a certain level, even not at their best, but still be better than most teams. And then in the playoffs, you turn it on. Like, think about Toronto last year again, because this is basically a prime example of it. When Kawhi didn't play last year, they still were one of the best teams in the Eastern Conference. This year, they're one of the best teams in the conference. But Kawhi gave him that other gear because he's that guy, he's that top end guy. That's why stars are important, and that's what got them to the championship. Toronto itself, without Kawhi, is a playoff team, no doubt. They can make the playoffs. They could be a top 2 seed. But in terms of the playoffs and really getting over the hump, that's where Kawhi was needed. And so that's what contributes to the success of them making that run. You gotta have everything meshed together. You gotta have everything built together. It puts them in position to be successful. Because the best thing you want to do is be put in your best positions of any player in the league and to be successful and do what you do best. That's why in the finals, you'll see everything be taken out. Every team will adjust so hard every game. That's why coaching, I think, is important. Sometimes that lineup change makes a difference, like Golden State did in the 2015 finals. You got to know everything has to kind of work for you. If you are a team who's competing against another team who's just as good. Like I said, unless you're Golden State, where you're just head shoulders better, you could have stuff go wrong and still be better. Remember, KD went down in the second round of the playoffs. And they still got to the NBA Finals and took it to 6 games. So they even showed you, even without the best player on our team, we are still better than basically the entire Western Conference. That should tell you something. Because a championship team has that ability. Listen, KD will get us to unstoppable, but at least we are good enough to get there. It's just if we face a team that's around our level, it'll be a little bit more difficult to get over the top. As it would be for most situations and most teams in any situation going forward. But that was, to me, a good, I guess, representation of what makes a championship team. What makes them successful. You have all the stars have to align, like they say. And just everything goes your way where you'll be successful to win a championship at the end of the day. But coming up next, we're going to talk about Dennis Rodman and Draymond Green and other players, as obviously a lot of people are roasting Draymond Green, talking about Dennis Rodman. I'll get into that next.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we're talking about what makes a championship team, what creates a championship run. I broke down some things that I think are very important when a team is making a championship run. Unless you're like Golden State and you're just head and shoulders better than everybody else, if you're a team that you're going to be a team that's going to be equal to you, coaching is important. Your star players playing clutch is important. And sometimes you need some luck to win. That sometimes is the case. It just really depends on every situation. Every situation is different. So, there isn't always just the one concrete formula, but there are main things that you would want in any formula that will create the ability to be successful and for you to win. I definitely believe that for sure. So that's definitely something that is in the cards. That's in the cards. So we're going to get into discussion now. Bleacher Report posted an image. Obviously, talking about the Dennis Rodman thing, says who comes down with the rebound, and the guys they have on the list is Rodman, KG, Barkley, Draymond, or Big Ben Wallace, and everybody is going crazy about Draymond being on it because If you think about it, Draymond Green is probably one of the most funniest players to roast in NBA history. Because I think where everybody has an issue with Draymond is that he flamboyantly talks like he is a average player. I mean, Draymond talks as he's a great player. And then people look at him as like, Draymond, you're really average when it comes to the stat line. It's not like you do anything that makes you head, shoulders, maybe better than someone else. It's not like you're the top power forward at your position. And yet you speak like you're this great thing. But a lot of people feel like when it comes to just players in the position, at his position in the league, he's not top 5. And in history, he's not anywhere. We're close. And some people like to say that Draymond Green is what he wishes he was if he was Dennis Rodman. So a lot of people get on to him about that. I think, obviously, because Ben Wallace, he obviously, if you remember his time with the Detroit Pistons, he was basically Dennis Rodman for that team. One of the elite rebounders, a guy who really did all the dirty work, very physical in the paint. When you went to battle with Ben Wallace, it was a war. And you came out of that game with bruises. Ben Wallace really is a guy who no one really talks about, but if you are a true basketball, OG, Ben Wallace was about it every night and was one of the key reasons why they were able to upset the Lakers with Shaq. And then, you have Barkley. Barkley is obviously one of the greatest players that ever won a championship. Barkley was a scoring machine, but everybody underrates Barkley was a rebounding machine at the same time. He was always one of the tops in the league in rebounding all of the time. Like I said, people get caught up in the scoring that he puts up week after week, game after game. But he was one of the best rebounders in the game at that time. Obviously, Kevin Garnett, he's a guy who came into the league out of high school, extremely talented, big ticket guy, double machine, a guy who always, had that great mid-range shot, could defend his butt off, and was always there for the rebound. Always there for the rebound. Every time. Every chance he had, every ability, every second. And then also, you have Rodman, who obviously, if you've seen in the docuseries, Rodman averaged crazy rebounding numbers. He was averaging 15 to 18 rebounds a season. He truly was a rebounding genius. And in the documentary, he did such a great job of explaining how he was so successful, how he basically studied, okay, if the ball hits this way, this is where I need to be. And he also talked about if a certain player shoots it, there's spin on it, there's not spin on it. So basically, he systematically, mentally knew, okay, whoever takes the shot, and however it hits or lands, I need to be here to get this rebound. It was just like a systematic, just dissection of how to rebound the basketball. That's why some people consider him the greatest rebounder of all times. You know, and then we have Draymond Green, who a lot of people like to make fun of him as the single triple guy. Guy maybe give you a couple points a game, give you some rebound, give you some assists, and you know, that's it. Obviously, a good Draymond Green is like 13, 10, and 12, which is not bad. I mean, it's not a bad stat line. It's just people feel like people, I guess, feel like with Draymond Green, people think because he's with Steph and Clay, and then with KD, that since he's been winning championships with them, you know, yeah, that people think he tries to uplift himself like I'm just as good as them. Without me, they wouldn't have won. And we can make an argument without Draymond, they wouldn't have. Now, obviously, if I think KD was there, I think that was probably not the case. If Draymond wasn't playing with Steph and Clay, they could still be in contention. I mean, just, you know, but Draymond has underlying skills. He can run the offense. He can play point if he had to. Draymond has great basketball IQ. That's one thing you can't take away from him. It's just, when you're talking about clear talent, I think a lot of people think Draymond Green is not that talented in terms of just a talented, because like basically, like Draymond Green is not a guy who can take over a game. You can't say Draymond take over and he takes over. There were games he had to play without Steph this year, and it's not like he lit it up. So they feel like Draymond Green is probably the ultimate player who needs a certain group around him and a certain offense around him to work. That's why people say it's a blessing in disguise that he's had Steph and Clay. You know, because we don't know if he went on another team, could he do the same things he do for Golden State? You know, and I think that's why I think everybody looks at Draymond and says, yeah, you won rings and yeah, you've made some big plays, but you're not a guy who we look at when we think about Golden State. Yeah, we're going to think about you, but we're never going to look at you as like, oh yeah, he was such a star. He was such a big name. People are going to think about, well, I remember him for kicking Steven Adams in the groin and you know, doing crotch shots and tactics and technicals. I'm not necessarily remembering you for any particular basketball play you made. And I think, you know, Draymond Green, you know, that's why I think in the basketball community, the respect for Draymond Green isn't as high. Remember, Draymond Green's a guy who doesn't back down from anybody. He's gone after legends who have called him out. Obviously, you've been noted on TNT how he's gone after Shaq. He's gone after Barkley a lot. And I think that's why I think some players in the game be like, I mean, listen, Draymond, you know, if we played a one-on-one, you couldn't beat me. So let's not make it seem like you're just this amazing player. Like, people basically think the reason why he's viewed and maybe he gets touted or he gets the accolades he gets is because of where he is, who he's playing with, and how successful the team is. And we just put him at the forefront of one of the biggest reasons why. Well, he's such a big contributor and such a great defender. Why they're such a great defensive team. So he obviously should be Defensive Player of the Year. And, you know, it's all part of that. You know, and, you know, Draymond Green, you know, is just a guy who, you know, listen, I think Draymond Green's in the perfect situation. If he wasn't in that situation, I don't think he would be as successful either. But I do feel like Draymond Green has value to any team that he goes on. It really just, Draymond's really one of those guys. You have to put him in the right situation, in the right system for him to be successful and for him to truly succeed moving forward. You can't sit here and say, Draymond, we need you to be the second option and score. That's not his game. He is meant to be a third option or less on a team. That's why with KD, he was a perfect fourth option. Like, he's somebody that you always have to put in that situation. It's just a third or a fourth option. Because outside of that, what do you, that's kind of the extent of Draymond Green. When he's put in those positions to thrive, he definitely is a guy who can definitely add value to any basketball team and create a system and an environment where he can be most successful, and you know, everybody can feel like, you know, oh yeah, Draymond Green's really doing something. Draymond Green's really done a lot for the NBA, what he's done. So obviously, that's a big deal from that perspective, talking about that. So coming up next on the podcast, we're going to continue my series I kind of started last week. I'm going to see something I'll slide in there, how I rebuild. And this week we're going to talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves and how I rebuilt the Minnesota Timberwolves right here on the podcast.
Are you looking to get your college football fixed? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Last segment, we broke down Draymond Green, obviously with Dennis Rodman being the spotlighted man in this weekend's last dance of Michael Jordan. Obviously, we talked about some of the greatest rebounders, power forwards in the game, centers, whatever you want to say. And obviously, Bleacher Report dropped a graphic, all 5 players going up for a ball, who would get the rebound. And everybody on Twitter was going off saying Draymond Green is not that good. Take him out of this. He is not that legendary. Please stop. and so that's obviously always a funny sight to see, when people jump all over Draymond Green. Probably voted one of the most hated players on one site in the NBA. Very interesting. Very, very interesting to me to see that, on paper. But now we're going to get into the little thing I've been doing, started last week, where I'll talk about teams that I currently are in the tanking or probably will be tanking in the lottery, and how I would fix them. What would be my quick or progressive fixes to how to get them at a better position and a better spot in their franchise so they can maybe start competing and being competitive again once again. Last week I did Cleveland and Atlanta. Now I'm doing the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now Minnesota obviously is a team, they have a star player, just like Atlanta did. They have a star in Karl-Anthony Towns. Karl-Anthony Towns just shows you, based off what you've seen so far, he's not going to get you into the playoffs, just based off his talent, but he's a guy who is a very important player. He's one of the best big men in the league. So I think they also added D'Angelo Russell to try. They wanted to try a new star duo between them. Now, obviously, we haven't seen it yet, so I can't sit here as a coach or as a GM if I was playing matchmaker or whatever and say, okay, D'Angelo has to go. But I think when they were successful making the playoffs, they had Wiggins, Levine, I believe. No, they didn't have Levine. They traded Levine. They had Wiggins, Karl-Anthony Towns, Jeff Teague, and Jimmy Butler. I think their team is in need of that. They need a star veteran player. They need a very high-end veteran player to go with those guys. To really get them over the top. To get them into the playoffs, at least in my opinion. I think that would be super key for them if they wanted to potentially make a run moving forward. And just going, doing the things that is necessary to be successful in the long term. Because I feel like when you saw the veteran leadership, it really helped Wiggins and Karl-Anthony Towns pick up their game. If we could get D'Lo from Brooklyn and then get the super talented Karl-Anthony Towns, you have 2 guys who can score the basketball. And then you have a third scorer. That's something I think definitely. You should always have at least 3 or 4 guys who get you 20 a night. Whether he comes off the bench or he's in the starting lineup. Because it really can really help from an offensive perspective in such an offensive-driven league. So that's obviously very important. So, I try to find a third guy. And so then, obviously, I like the head coach. I like Flip Fonder's son. I think he's a good up-and-coming young coach. I think also, with the way their roster's constructed right now, I think Minnesota needs another big with Karl-Anthony Towns that could kind of work off of him. Since Karl-Anthony Towns can be in the paint and outside the paint, he's not necessarily someone who has to be in the paint, even though he has the ability, obviously, too, with his stretch forwardness. I could even maybe potentially see about maybe making him potentially a 4, with his talent, and see if he can maybe play some 4 and then have maybe more of a true center at the 5. That is definitely somebody. Then they also got a guy from the Denver Nuggets, Blake Beasley, who has played very, very well for them. Very, very well for them. He's definitely someone who could be a part of the system. I think him and D'Angelo Russell will be a great 1-2 combo group for Karl-Anthony Towns. Gerald Culver has not played what they played as well as they expected. So obviously there's been disappointment there. Very, very lackluster rookie season. Obviously you hope that he can make a jump. And I'm sure if I was there, I was like, listen, if we want to start winning in 2 years, he needs to at least show more progression next year. Or else this may be a guy that we could keep on the team, but he'll have to play deeper end of the bench and has to earn it. Because if outside of that, their team has a lot of players who are decent role players. They can play a little bit. Obviously, Her Gomez is a good player. Evan Turner's a veteran who's been around. Amari Spellman's trying to find his niche. He's been traded like 3 times already. James Johnson, a veteran. They have some guys, but you definitely need to fill it out with more veteran leadership and talent around them. Because obviously I feel like Minnesota just has a lack of talent around them. Obviously Minnesota isn't a city that's just going to get players to come there. Again, it's one of those situations where they kind of have to build up from the draft. Which, again, if they get another lottery pick, they could be the mix for Lemelo Ball, which I don't think they'll take. If they could get a Wiseman, I could see that working out. Obviously, ideally, if they could get like an Anthony Edwards, that could be their new big 3, so to say. That could be their new, unit moving forward that you build around and see if maybe it can become a championship team. Because if it can, again, another successful season, and it can be very successful for everybody when it gets down to it. It just really depends. And so on and so forth. But also, like I said, I think with this team, I think you definitely want this team to be more of a space team, more of a stretch the field court up and down kind of team. I think that would be it would fit the talent they have best in what they're trying to do and talent they could potentially bring into the future. So it really just take that and you can really maybe work with that, make something off of that, and really create a winning environment. And also, obviously, you want to establish Minnesota has never been a great defensive team, except, like I said, the year with Jimmy Butler, obviously showing how the impact Jimmy Butler brings to a team. But obviously, we definitely have to get defensive. We definitely got to get some 3-and-D guys in there who can play some defense, show these guys how to play defense. D'Angelo Russell's never been known as a defensive player, even though he has the talent to be. Same thing with Karl-Anthony Towns. If we could get them to play defense, because listen, if your best players are playing defense, the entire team's playing defense. It's going to be very important to me to tell, Saunders, like, hey, you got to get these guys to kind of show what the team wants to be. We've always questioned, when Jimmy Butler said it all the time, these guys are better than me. They have the talent to be better than me. But they don't always play like they're better than me. I always seem like I'm the best player of the team, and that shouldn't be the case. He was being realistic. He wanted to get the max and the most out of them. And so, if that is, and that's why again Wiggins is out of there, because obviously Wiggins was the more of the guy who seemed like he never really improved a lot. He just was the same old. That's why they hope in Golden State he'll take it and he'll improve under Steph and he'll improve under Clay and see what happens. So obviously I think that's one of the big things there. But Minnesota is a team that has talent. It's just getting the right pieces around them and trying to formulate what is the best style of play for the team. I think an up and down, spaced out game, because D'Lo can hit open guys and D'Lo can score. You want to give your two best scorers the ability to put the ball on the floor and make plays, but also make plays for others, and that could create a very successful unit, I think, for the Minnesota Timberwolves. But that's all we have here on the GSMC Basketball Podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow us on all of our social media. Listen to our other amazing podcasts on the GSMC Podcast Network. Thank you and have a good day. Brice signing off.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Basketball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.